is like somebody who has never seen a gun before playing with a gun, not understanding the power of the gun that they hold in their hand, what it can actually do. If you are the one who holds the keys to these algorithms, then you have immense sway over everything that happens in the world.
Hey, I want to welcome you today once again to the Uncensored Pilgrims podcast. I'm Marty McLain along with
Paul Price.
And today we are going to talk about social media and the techno-surveillance state. That sounds kind of ominous. We're going to talk about social media presence, how this can be used to control society, or should I say maybe direct society, the role of algorithms. And, I was thinking about algorithms, and this is something that's always come to my mind. I'm kind of, as I've gotten older, I've developed a lot of dad jokes. And, the thing about dad jokes is that if you think they're funny, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter whether or not somebody else thinks they're funny or not.
If you think they're funny, you're probably a dad.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a part of your brain, Paul, that will develop more and more the older you get and the older your kids get. Mm-hmm. And it's that dad joke part of your brain. Mm-hmm. And mine has just blossomed in these years. But, I couldn't help but think with algorithms, back in 1992, Bill Clinton was elected president, and his vice president was Al Gore.
Right.
Now, Al Gore was misquoted as saying that he invented the internet. Matter of fact, when he ran for president in the year 2000 against George W. Bush, people kind of laughed. Oh, he said he invented the internet. Al Gore invented the internet.
I remember that joke going around.
Yeah, and so what I think is kind of the revenge of the former vice president is most things on the internet are controlled by algorithms. Yeah, I used to think
that's a dad joke.
Yeah, it is. I used to think algorithm was the vice president on the dance floor, busting a move. But anyway, I could have a lot of fun with that. But it is interesting that so much on the internet, especially when it pertains to social media, is controlled by algorithms. Now, the reason why that would possibly be the case is I just found something on the internet. And Paul, if I find it on the internet, what do you think percentage-wise it's true?
Well, the algorithm led you to this information about the algorithm, right?
Okay, so here's the algorithm leading me to information about the algorithm. Say on a typical day, there are 2.3 billion Google searches, 2.2 million blog posts written, 264 million tweets that are sent, 2.4 billion videos viewed on YouTube, 28 million photos uploaded on Instagram, and 47 million posts on Tumblr. Now, with this volume of information, there has to be some way that you can organize it to make it useful for people. And is that kind of what the role of algorithms are, Paul?
Yeah, in a way. So, back in the early days of the internet, before there were algorithms...
Before there was Al Gore?
No. He's much older than the internet.
Yes, he is.
Because he invented it, right?
That's exactly.
But in the early days of web search, you didn't have... And I wasn't really around for the earliest of the early days of web search in the sense of I was too young to really be using the internet. But from what I've understood, it did not produce... the earlier web searching was just like basically a catalog of websites. It would just list out websites rather than, selecting from that list for you based on your search terms.
Okay.
So as Google was a major pioneer in it. Certainly it wasn't the only search engine out there. It wasn't the first by any means either.
Right.
Earlier than Google, I remember back in high school using a search engine called Metacrawler. Metacrawler is the one I remember using back in, this was the early 2000s I'm talking about. So pre-2004, there was Metacrawler that I used a lot. There was also Ask Jeeves.
So, I remember that one.
These are still around, some of them.
Okay.
Although they're not, popular anymore. But,
right.
Yeah, you had Ask Jeeves, you had Metacrawler, you had Dogpile.
Dogpile.
Yeah, so there were several.
That brings back bad memories.
But they were all basically superseded by Google, ultimately. Before Google's big, ascension to power, before them it was Yahoo.
Yahoo, I remember they used to have the commercials. Yahoo.
Yep. And basically, it was a war to see who could get the best algorithms, and Google won.
So it was, to start out with, it was to be helpful.
Yeah, that's how it started out. It was to be helpful.
In a generic way, not a political...
Not in a political way.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't for that. And, everything was just way more innocent, and people just didn't know what they had back then.
Yeah.
Is like somebody who has never seen a gun before playing with a gun, not understanding the power of the gun that they hold in their hand, what it can actually do.
Yeah, then you got people that kind of figure things out.
Yeah.
And everybody, it's human nature to want to control.
Yeah. So, and as more and more people, here's the other thing. In those early days, the percentage of the population that was actually online was way smaller than it is today.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as lucrative, politically speaking, to control the internet back then.
Yeah.
Because it was mostly nerds and geeks, and it was a tiny little slice of the population was actually going on the internet to get information.
And you have people in my generation where we were kind of very skeptical, like I think I might have mentioned last week, of putting our financial information on the internet, because
so there wasn't online
shopping.
There wasn't online shopping like there is today, and most people were not getting their news from the internet primarily. Most people were still getting their news from newspapers
and
television. So but that has all changed today.
Yes, it has.
And now that people are on the internet in such large numbers, now it is very politically and financially lucrative to be able to control the internet.
Yes.
So, now if you are the one who holds the keys to these algorithms, then you have immense sway over everything that happens in the world, because you're now controlling what people see and what people don't see.
Right.
What people hear about, what they don't hear about.
Yes.
It's now all controlled by algorithms.
Yeah, I had somebody recently say how much they spent per month with Google to have their business put toward the top of the search.
Yeah.
So that when people look up a certain item that they sell, that they specialize in, they're going to be one of the, top things that come up. And it costs a lot of money. So there's a lot of internet. There's a lot of money to be made.
Yes.
So first of all, it's very capitalistic in a way, where people can invest, they can make money, they can have a product. The algorithm is a product in some ways, right?
Yeah, and bringing out the aspect of the profit aspect. So I would say that there are two ways that the algorithms are being used to control people now.
Okay.
The first way is for profit. So what people have figured out and what they understand is that people like to see things that they like, and they don't like to see things that they don't like. Isn't that just profound?
Yes. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. It feels good to see stuff that you like to see.
Yeah.
It feels bad to see stuff that you don't like to see.
Yeah, I like to see Georgia stuff. I don't like to see Alabama stuff.
So do you imagine that the average consumer would spend more money if they're happy or unhappy?
Yeah,
probably happy, right?
Sure.
And they're probably going to spend or donate, whatever it is, buy or donate. They're probably going to have more economic activity by stimulating a person in a way that they like,
right,
compared to not. And so the profit motive leads people to engineer the algorithm in such a way that you are shown things that the algorithm has determined you are going to like. And the way that it determines that is to examine the history of your previous clicks and comments
Search
and
history
search
even?
history,
Yes.
whatever it is, because it's not just your search history on your web browser. All of these platforms are also keeping track of a history of what you've looked at on their platform, or what
Yes.
you've clicked on, or what you've typed.
Right.
And so they're using this data. It's called data mining.
Yeah.
This is the term in the industry, data mining.
Right.
And it's basically looking at huge quantities of data to determine a relationship, a statistical relationship between these data points.
Yes.
And when they can determine those statistical relationships, then they will use that information to pump more of what they determine you're probably going to like into
Right.
your news feed.
Right.
That's just how it works. So the end result of that, and the whole point of that isn't really even anything about controlling politics or anything. It's just about money. They know that you're going to stay on their platform for longer,
Right.
spend more time with them, see more ads, so on and so forth, if you're getting what you want.
Right.
So they want to give you what you want.
So there's obviously a good purpose in that, just the way the economy works.
Well, but this also has unintended negative consequences
Okay.
as well. What it's doing is, they call it social media.
Mm-hmm.
What it really is anti-social media,
Okay.
because it's actually increasing polarization. It's increasing people's division.
Because it's grouping you up.
It's grouping you up into like-minded groups and
Yes.
keeping you there.
Yeah, it's kind of like they used to say that America was like a big
They used to say a melting pot.
melting pot.
Yeah.
But they say now we're a mosaic.
Right? I haven't heard that. A
Yeah.
mosaic.
Yes. So it's almost like you have different parts that maintain their identity in the midst of other parts instead of all melting together into one big goo.
Uh-huh.
All the cultures melting together into a big goo. Instead of that, they almost are getting it where people maintain their own separate identity as a people group.
So it's more like America is a salad dressing of oil and vinegar.
Could be.
And no matter how many times you shake it up, eventually the oil will separate from the vinegar.
Yeah. Eventually you let it settle. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how things have changed and the whole perspective that people have. And I reckon social media feeds into that, and we'll segue into the whole aspect of social media.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you this. Do you have what social media are you on?
Well, to be honest, I haven't really been on social media for quite a while. I got fed up with it. I got to where I didn't like Facebook anymore.
Okay.
I was one of the first people to adopt Facebook back in the mid-2000s.
Okay.
When Facebook, I don't know if you remember this, but in the earliest days, you had to be a college student to be on Facebook.
Are you serious?
It was not open to all people.
Well, I didn't
You
know
had to
that.
you had to have an email address that ended in .edu. You had
I
to
had
have
no idea.
You couldn't sign up for Facebook unless you had a college student email address.
My goodness.
So those were the glory days of Facebook to me, because it was so much different back then. And obviously,
So you didn't have any older people posting recipes back then?
no cat posts, no recipes,
No cat videos.
no,
That's amazing.
yeah. So that changed pretty quickly when Mark Zuckerberg, I guess, realized that he could make more money if he opened it up to more people.
Opened it up. Yes, he did.
And obviously that changed the whole character of it going forward.
Yes.
And it's never been the same since.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've got, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I got a couple others I don't even hardly look at. But you're able to keep tabs on people, relatives, friends way back from the past. People I hadn't seen in 30 or 40 years. I know what they're doing because I'm a Facebook friend with them. And, so and so's having a birthday, happy birthday, and
But do you think there might be a hidden danger in that? Maybe, do you think it's possible that it gives people a false sense of community?
yeah, we have seen people, and I don't want to be one of these that goes around saying, well, the younger generation, but I'll say the younger generation,
Yeah.
That text all the time and that are on social media. Sometimes
Don't even get me started on texting.
Sometimes when you see them in a social setting, some of them, they don't interact.
Yeah.
They just don't interact. And I do think that the whole social media thing has stunted some people's social development as far as in person.
Yeah.
Because some people are really good if they can do it with their thumbs, if they can text it, or if they can post something. People have a social media presence sometimes that is not anything like their real physical presence.
For sure. It's a false front people put up.
It is a false front, and but there are some good things. Social media, we're able to post like at the church. We're able to post our church service. We're able to make announcements, keep in touch with people. I mean, there are good aspects of social media, but one of the things that we are seeing now, is we're going to kind of segue now into the techno-surveillance state, is that some people are using the social media venues, the data mining that you speak of. They're using this for some nefarious purposes.
Yeah.
And there are people who would like to, through the technology, exert more control over the everyday lives of little old people like me and you.
Oh, yeah. And all this social media talk has suddenly jogged my memory that I should be telling the audience right now, like, subscribe, and share.
Yeah, we want you on social media when it comes to us.
Yeah.
Now. Yeah, come on.
Like, subscribe, and share,
put us
please.
on social media.
Because we want to be on the algorithm.
We want to have a piece of the algorithm.
Yeah. Before we get too far away from that other topic of the way that the algorithm is grouping people together, several years back, I wrote a Creation.com article called "Shatter the Echo Chamber."
Okay.
And so, if you've looked into social media, you've probably heard this term thrown around. But basically, the echo chamber is what I was talking about. How people are being shuffled into like-minded groups because that's what they like to hear. They like to hear opinions and statements that echo what they already believe because it makes them feel good.
I found out, like, on one of my social media sites, if I post anything that's overly political,
yes,
there's like 5 people that it goes to.
Yeah.
And they're the same 5 people a lot of times. And I appreciate the 5 people. I really do. God bless you. I appreciate it. But sometimes I think those are only 5 people that see it. But if I post a picture of my family, or if I post something that's just a bunch of words, then I have all these people respond to it.
Yeah.
So it just leads me to believe that something's throttling down certain posts.
Yes, I'm sure that is the case. So a study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences confirms what we're just talking about here. And I'm reading this out of the article that I wrote, by the way.
Okay.
But from their abstract to their paper, they wrote, social media heavily changed the way we get informed and shape our opinions. Users' polarization seems to dominate news consumption on Facebook. Through a massive analysis on 920 news outlets and 376 million users, we explore the anatomy of news consumption on Facebook on a global scale. We show that users tend to confine their attention on a limited set of pages, thus determining a sharp community structure among news outlets.
Okay.
And then they write, content consumption on Facebook is strongly affected by the tendency of users to limit their exposure to a few sites. Despite the wide availability of content and heterogeneous narratives, there is a major segregation and growing polarization in online news consumption. So what all that basically means is, even though the internet is home to a wide diversity of different viewpoints and different pieces of information and interpretations of that information.
Right.
Even though that is the case, people are not experiencing that in a all the way around. They are only seeing what they're only going to, and they're only reading those voices that they agree with, and they're ignoring the voices that they don't agree with.
The voices of dissent.
The voices of dissent.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, that is making it, that is having tremendous negative impacts on our culture because we're getting more and more and more polarized.
Right.
That is causing our society to essentially disintegrate in a way where we can't work together if we can't,
we're being balkanized.
Yeah, we're being balkanized, exactly. And what do you think that does to Christians trying to share the gospel?
Yeah, it sure does.
I mean, if you're not already a Christian, then you're not in that echo chamber.
Yeah.
And that is certain platforms are worse about it than others. They're all bad about it. But like, have you ever heard of Reddit?
Yeah.
Reddit is like democracy applied to social media posts, because on Reddit, if you post something and people don't like it, they can downvote it, and if enough people downvote it, it'll get hidden so that nobody can see it.
Okay.
Imagine that.
Huh.
So it's basically mob rule. Whatever people like gets upvoted, and then everybody sees it, and whatever people don't like gets downvoted, and it gets hidden.
Wow. Okay.
And that's not a secret. That's just how Reddit works.
Yeah.
So,
Well, let me ask you this. Okay. So, you have algorithms, but what happens when the government gets involved with what you see
yes.
and what you don't see?
Well, that makes it obviously even worse, doesn't it?
That is a problem. Now, currently, they have found out, with Elon Musk, with his purchase of Twitter, and he's releasing the Twitter files, which is very intriguing what's happening with that. But they have found out that there was some collusion going on with people in the Biden administration with Twitter and Facebook. I think Zuckerberg even said it in a deposition, or he said it on, maybe it was on Joe Rogan's show, that Zuckerberg talked about having meetings with government officials. Mm-hmm. But anyway, they have colluded, the government has colluded with social media sites to say, hey, this is what we want, this is what we don't want. And they would get in touch with them and say, we need to probably take this post down. Yeah. This post is not in agreement with our narrative. Yeah. So, the First Amendment to the Constitution talks about freedom of speech, freedom of the press. And here you have the government's not supposed to infringe upon that right. So the government cannot curtail your free speech. But what's happening is that people in the government are telling companies, these companies, take this stuff off your platform because it's not in agreement with our narrative that we have on COVID-19, that we may have about the election, that we may have about whatever. Even, the biggest thing that they did was when they took any mention to the Hunter Biden story about his laptop prior to the 2020 election. The New York Post, what I say, the fourth largest paper in circulation, the oldest paper founded by Alexander Hamilton. They took that off Twitter because, they published about, I think it was Miranda Devine, published an article about Hunter's laptop. And, people were, the government said, that's Soviet misinformation. And they had all these former intelligence officers come out and say, it's Soviet misinformation. I mean, not Soviet, Russian misinformation. Yeah. I'm behind the times, Russian misinformation. And so, they took it off because the government, those in the government said, take it off.
Yeah.
There's a problem.
When we say government, what we really mean here in this case is the Democrat Party, right?
Yeah, although you had a Republican president at the time, you have what, some say the deep state, whatever you want to call people.
Yeah, the deep state.
You do have a government within the government. Obviously you do. And so you had those that said, take that off, about Hunter. And then when Biden came in to be president, you'd have people communicating with the social media platforms saying, we want this information taken off because it does not go with what we're saying about COVID-19 or whatever it may be. And so the government, even though they were not curtailing your free speech, they were suggesting or coercing or colluding with the social media sites that did control what you found
This
out.
is a question that I've always had. our Constitution guarantees us certain rights. But why have we allowed ourselves to have those rights stripped from us via a loophole?
Yeah.
And that loophole is, well, the rights don't apply to what non-government actors do, like
Right.
corporations.
Right.
Corporations, they can censor your free speech.
Right.
It's just that the government can't do it.
Yes, and but the
So
government was...
why did we allow ourselves to get thrust into this situation in the first place, where the whole narrative of our society is controlled by platforms that are under the control of corporate bodies,
Well,
and these corporate bodies aren't expected to follow the rules of the U.S. Constitution?
Yes, and you'll find out these corporate bodies are directed by the government.
They're not politically neutral.
They're not politically
And they're allowing
neutral.
themselves to be directed by the government. So, in my opinion, our constitutional rights should apply to what they do.
Yes. I mean, it is kind of a, whether something's a public platform or not. And there's that section that they're talking about that they wanted overturned that applies to the social media sites, and it gives them a certain amount of leeway and protects them because they're not they're not a publisher, or I forget however that works. But you had this state attorney generals of Missouri and Louisiana. They filed a lawsuit pertaining to the collusion with the First Amendment. It says, under the First Amendment, the federal government may not police private speech nor pick winners and losers in the marketplace of ideas. Now, this is from an article I'm reading from the New Civil Liberties Alliance. It continues, but this is precisely what the government has done and is still doing on a massive scale not previously divulged. Multiple agencies' communications demonstrate that the federal government has exerted tremendous pressure on social media companies, pressure to which companies have repeatedly bowed. So, Paul, you can imagine if you are the head of one of these social media sites, say you're Jack Dorsey, who used to be the head of Twitter, or you're Mark Zuckerberg, and the federal government says, hey, we want you to take this down. And the power of the federal government, if they want to get nasty, they can get nasty.
Yeah.
What was it? Chuck Schumer said that if the FBI ever goes after you, they got 7 ways to Sunday to get you.
Sure.
So whatever 7 ways to Sunday is, I take it as they'll get you. If they want to get you, they can find something to get you with. And so when the government starts putting that pressure on you, you can understand how some people would fold like a cheap suit, or however. But that's something to contend with.
Well, certainly, I don't think that should be allowed. But there's also another aspect of pressure happening, not from the government, but from the internal employees. What I was reading about Twitter, from what Elon Musk has been revealing about the whole thing,
right?
Like when they banned Donald Trump, for example.
Yes.
I read that what occurred there is that the Internal Trust and Safety Council had actually looked at Trump's tweets and determined that he did not violate the rules.
I saw that.
But there was such a popular discontent within the employees at Twitter that Jack Dorsey bowed to the pressure and did it anyway.
Right.
Because the people that work at Twitter certainly are not evenly split between conservative and liberal.
Yeah.
So there's an overwhelming liberal slant.
I'd say probably 95%.
Probably so. So that's, they didn't like the fact that Twitter, that Donald Trump was using their platform.
He used it in an incredible fashion when he was, president.
So they basically decided that they were going to de-platform him, even though he hadn't really violated any terms of service.
And they let the Ayatollah and all those people in Iran stay on Twitter. They let all these other people who were horrible stay on Twitter, but yet they de-platformed the sitting president of the United States.
So basically what this boils down to is we have come into a situation where corporate bodies are controlling our speech, what we can and cannot say.
Yes.
And these corporate bodies can be influenced by their own politics and also by the government.
Yeah, let me just read this to you. Back on April 27th, the Department of Homeland Security announced the creation of the first, quote, disinformation Governance Board. This article says it's got a stated goal to, quote, coordinate countering misinformation related to Homeland Security. And the head of it was supposed to be Nina Jankowicz. She was, a well-known figure in the field of fighting disinformation and extremism as the board's executive director. Now, this Nina Jankowicz she's a leftist. She was all for, from what she's indicated on social media, she was okay with the Steele dossier if you've kept up with that kind of stuff. And she believed, the Russia disinformation stuff about Hunter Biden laptop. And yet, here she is, very biased, yet she was supposed to be the head of this disinformation governance board that the Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, he was heading that up, and they were going to have someone in place that was supposed to, look at our speech and determine what was disinformation, misinformation. Is that really the government's responsibility in a society where you're supposed to have freedom of speech?
No.
So there was
we don't need to have a ministry of truth.
No, and that's exactly what it was compared to, George Orwell's Ministry of Truth.
Yeah.
And you had so many people that raised, a ruckus about it that they had to put it on hold.
Yeah.
Now, but the thing is, they wanted to have it.
Yeah.
They wanted to have that disinformation board. They wanted to have where they could tell you what was true and what was not.
But why did they even need one if all they really have to do is allow corporations like Twitter to build their own ministry of truth?
Right.
And let them do the dirty work for them.
Well, here's what's so funny is now that, I'm not a big, and my wife has reminded me, which I'm glad she has, Elon Musk is problematic. I mean, he, even with his latest going to the, he went to some party recently dressed as the devil's champion, which that's kind of problematic. It's not that I don't really, I like what Elon Musk is doing with Twitter, but now that Elon Musk has turned the tables on liberals at Twitter, and now some of them have been deplatformed or suspended. Now all these people on the left are saying, whoa, this is, freedom of speech, he shouldn't be able to do this, whatnot and all this stuff. But, it's kind of like, okay, nobody likes for this to happen. People want to be able to talk. People want to have freedom of speech. And nobody likes it when they get deplatformed. And so it's kind of been a turnabout as fair play.
Well, and I think what you brought up about Elon Musk kind of serves to show the point of how we're being manipulated by this sort of contrived and false paradigm of quote-unquote left versus right.
Yeah.
But it seems to have, whether you're considered left or right, doesn't seem to have a whole lot to do with what you actually believe. Because, since when is Elon Musk on the right or conservative?
No.
Since when?
No.
There's
a lot of things.
He's a transhumanist. We talked about that last week. He's a transhumanist.
Yes.
So to call him a figure on the right, just because he's in favor of free speech, is kind of ridiculous.
It really is ridiculous. But he is experiencing the full wrath of the left. Some have even doxed him, and they told his real-time location.
Yes.
Which could put him and his family in peril. There are people out there that want to kill Elon Musk.
Sure.
And if they know where he's going to be, what time he's going to be there, that could be problematic for him and for his family. It's very dangerous.
Well, I agree with that. I think if you get famous enough, there's always somebody out there that wants to kill you.
Yeah.
Because there's crazy people out there. So the more people that have heard of you, the more important it is for your privacy to be maintained completely, because people are crazy and they will seek you out.
You're exactly
so
right.
I agree with what he did in that situation of not allowing people to post real time where he is. That is certainly a security risk.
Yeah, here's as far as why censorship and what happened in 2020 with the Hunter Biden story, and now it's coming out to be factual, but that it was censored like it was.
Yeah.
And there were those in the government that told them to censor it. Michael Brown has an article, and here's what he says about. He's quoting. Actually, it's a quote by Newt Gingrich. He says, "Quote: The truth of the Hunter Biden story is now becoming impossible to avoid or conceal. The family of the Democrat nominee for president received at least $5 million from an entity controlled by our greatest adversary, meaning China. It was a blatant payoff, and most Americans who voted for Biden never heard of it, or were told before the election it was Russian disinformation. Once they did hear of it, 17% said they would have switched their votes, according to a poll by the Media Research Center. That's the entire election. The censorship worked exactly as intended.
Yeah.
So censorship served a political purpose for a candidate at a very crucial time in American history. And that was the manipulation of social media, what was allowable, what was not allowable. And, you have the connection there to China, and that's going to segue us into TikTok. Do you have a TikTok account?
I surely do not.
Okay, I've never had a
I've
TikTok.
never even used it. I don't know what it's like or what it's about at all.
Yeah, every time I see stuff on TikTok, it looks kind of, kind of a little bit weird. But, people do different type of movements. I don't know. It's just kind of, I don't know. I can't figure TikTok out. Maybe there's a reason.
Well, I can't help you in any way on that one.
But what they have done just recently, even this week, the Senate passed legislation. Actually, yesterday, today's Thursday. Today's Friday. It would have been 2 days ago, Wednesday. But they Wednesday evening passed a resolution to ban TikTok from U.S. government devices. Now, it's a move designed to limit perceived information security risks stemming from the social media app. Of course, they are owned. TikTok's owned by the parent company ByteDance. Now, here's what you got to assume: any company that's out of China, you have to automatically 100% assume that they have ties to the CCP.
Of course,
they're tied to the government. I mean, it's a totalitarian state.
That goes without saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and so if you think that you're dealing with a Chinese company that does not have ties to the Chinese government, that's when you can, you have that Brooklyn Bridge that you want to sell somebody. That you're very gullible if you think that there are no ties to the communist government by Chinese companies. So when you have a company like ByteDance who has an app, TikTok, that has tens of millions, hundreds of millions actually users worldwide, I think, you've got to understand that the data that they collect from TikTok, they're going to use it for purposes probably that you don't want them to. You have facial recognition, you have voice recognition, you have keystroke patterns, you have all this biometric data that they are collecting from that app for purposes that people are kind of concerned about.
Of course, yeah. And
so, so you start looking at, okay, what is the deal with facial recognition technology? We find out, a recent survey from the Deseret News says that the Government Accountability Office found that 18 of 24 federal agencies evaluated use facial recognition technology. Now, facial recognition technology is problematic. Earlier this year, the IRS was going to make it where if you wanted to see your tax return online, you had to go through that facial recognition technology.
Oh, wow.
And so there's such an uproar and backlash from it, so they had to back down on it. But now you have the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration. It says they have been testing facial recognition technology as an option for travelers at select U.S. airport for years, touted as a way to speed up identity verification at security. This is an article. It continues, it says, but now the federal agency is poised to implement the system nationwide, causing alarm for privacy advocates and other critics who say facial scanning systems bring a flurry of concerns. Now, the screenings are dubbed, quote, credential authentication technology with camera. It's also known as CAT2. They were rolled out by the Department of Homeland Security in 2017 as part of a pilot program, and they involved scanning flyers' faces at the TSA checkpoint and comparing the images to the traveler's documents, such as their driver's license and passport.
Now, I thought that's actually what the job of the TSA agent was.
that they were to do that, right? They're supposed to look at your license and look at you.
Why do we need the computer to do it if we're paying people to do it?
Well, are you
A human.
Are you familiar with the totalitarian state that they have over in China?
Yes, I am.
And
The one that they are quickly trying to recreate in our own country.
yes, and it's alarming. This stuff is very alarming. As a matter of fact, close to where we live in Cobb County, Georgia, they have just voted to use the facial recognition technology with their police department.
Yeah.
It says, this is an article, I think it's from the Marietta Daily Journal online. It says, Cobb's police chief defended the department's use of a controversial facial recognition technology Tuesday as county commissioners approved a new contract with firm Clearview AI. So here's what some of the people responses they had to this. Quote, I don't give you permission to own my face. That's what Susan Strevens of Ackworth said.
Yeah.
There are others that said, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but AI technology has a terrible rate of identifying African Americans. That's what Robin Moody said. So you have this company that they purport to have 30 billion facial images in their database.
Yeah.
And the police department, they want it because they say it makes solving cases easier. They talked about there's one case that they were able to solve, and they hadn't been able to solve in years, but it took them just seconds by using the facial recognition technology.
And there's always a good argument like that to be made, right?
Right.
There's always a good argument, but here's what it also does. It makes it easier for the government to keep track of the citizens, doesn't it?
Yes.
And all they have to do then is have a centralized cloud storage based way to maintain a record of all the security cameras nationwide.
Yeah.
And guess what? You can't go anywhere without AI knowing that you were there.
Exactly.
Imagine that.
Yes.
Because if your face gets picked up on a security camera anywhere, then according to facial recognition technology, they will flag it and they will say, there's a data point.
Yes.
This person was there.
Yes, and this is how they control their population over in China.
Yeah.
And everybody knows it. Now, if I read correctly, the Chinese government, they have access to over 500 million cameras in China.
Yeah.
So you can imagine the database, and they're supposed to be able to run this in no time. I mean, they bragged about how quick they could identify somebody.
Yeah.
Through all, you got over 1 billion people in that country, and
Right.
yeah, they think that they can identify all these people through the facial recognition technology,
Sure.
which they use, and also they use their social media app, WeChat.
Yeah.
I think that's the approved Chinese social media app for the Chinese citizens. They have Huawei, which is the big telecommunications company from China.
Yeah.
I think they're the world's leader in 5G technology.
Okay.
And so you have Huawei that, and especially in Africa, I think in the Middle East, China has that Belt and Road Initiative where they're, building all these roads and infrastructure in all these countries, third world countries, and even in European countries, not just third world, but other countries throughout the world. And they're installing their Huawei 5G technology.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of surveillance that they can do with that 5G technology.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, recently, if you've been keeping up with stuff, they now have what they would call, some are calling police departments in other countries, police stations. Like they have police stations in the United States.
Who has them?
The Chinese.
Really?
Yeah, and they are using it to control their citizens, their expatriates that are in the United States. They keep tabs on them through these.
And the United States is allowing them to do this?
Isn't that kind of strange?
Well, this is news to me. I hadn't heard of that.
I've read they have one in New York. They have one in Toronto, Canada, and they are able to, surveil the expatriates that from China, the Chinese people that are living in America. They're able to exert threats and coercion, trying to get them to come back to the mainland to face charges, come back to China to face charges, even though they're living in other countries. This is bizarre, isn't it?
It is bizarre, but it's not bizarre if you come to the understanding that really we are sliding into this one world government, whether we like it or not. and it's not necessarily being done in the open because obviously American citizens don't want to be controlled by China or by the European Union or by any other by anything other than the U.S. government under the U.S. Constitution. But apparently, this is happening under our noses without being announced.
Well, here's what it says. Here's an article from November 18th of this year, 2022. It says, quote, the FBI is investigating an unauthorized, quote, police station that China is running out of New York as part of a global network of such outposts, FBI Director Christopher Wray said on Thursday, vowing to put a stop to Beijing's law enforcement activity in the United States. Speaking during a Senate Homeland Security Committee hearing, Wray said the FBI is, quote, aware of the existence of these stations. Quote, I have to be careful about discussing our specific investigative work, but to me it's outrageous to think that the Chinese police would attempt to set up shop in New York, for example, without proper coordination. The audacity.
How can there be coordination?
Exactly.
We cannot work with the Chinese totalitarian government.
Are we going to help them get their citizens back that, don't agree with their government?
Yeah.
So, that is what the Chinese, now I'm not saying this about the Chinese people. I'm saying it's about the Chinese government.
Correct.
The Chinese government, the CCP, they're horrible, but they have set the tone for the techno-surveillance state. And, with the World Economic Forum, once again, our buddy Klaus Schwab, he has said that the Chinese government serves as a model for many countries.
Well,
and, the World Economic Forum, they kind of give inclinations that they'd be okay with the techno-surveillance state. As a matter of fact, in his book, COVID-19, The Great Reset, World Economic Forum globalist Klaus Schwab asserts that the world will, quote, never return to normal.
Well, that's their goal, isn't it?
Yes. Here he said about the COVID, he said, quote, now is the historical moment of time not only to fight the virus, but to shape the system for the post-corona era. Many of us are pondering when things will return to normal. The short response is never. Nothing will ever return to the broken sense of normalcy that prevailed prior to the crisis because the coronavirus pandemic marks a fundamental inflection point in our global trajectory.
And we're supposed to believe that inflection point came surely by accident.
Yeah, it's right? it's getting harder and harder.
Even though
to think that.
Yeah, even though now it's being admitted that there's a good chance that the virus came out of a Wuhan Chinese Communist lab.
Yeah.
So is it still a conspiracy theory to say that it was done on purpose? Or is that now just a given fact?
Like they say, the difference between conspiracy theory and reality is 6 months.
Yeah. So which I can't keep track of where we are on that 6 month timeline.
I think we're at 8 months.
Okay.
Here's something that John Whitehead said. He is the founder and president of the Rutherford Institute. He said about it. He has an article about all the ways that the techno-authoritarianism is here to stay. He talks about the geofencing, the AI surveillance, the digital authoritarianism. But he quotes about the digital authoritarianism. He says, again, we must look to China to understand what awaits us. As Human Rights Watch analyst Maya Wang explains, quote, Chinese authorities use technology to control the population all over the country in subtler but still powerful ways. The central bank is adopting digital currency, which will allow Beijing to surveil and control people's financial transactions. China is building so-called safe cities, which integrate data from intrusive surveillance systems to predict and prevent everything from fires to natural disasters and political dissent. The government believes that these intrusions, together with administrative actions such as denying blacklisted people access to services, will nudge people toward positive behaviors, including greater compliance with government policies and healthy habits such as exercising.
Yes.
Doesn't that bless your heart?
Yeah, and we started all of this talking about corporations and social media platforms, and I talked about how the algorithm is serving a profit motive.
Yeah.
But the second half to that is there is also this deliberate motive, the deliberate political motive to shape the conversation. It came out. This is now several years old, this story, but Mark Zuckerberg was found to be manipulating the trending stories on Facebook.
Okay.
The idea was supposed to be this was organic, right?
Yeah.
The algorithm was just picking, well, this is what people think is interesting, so here we're going to put it on the trending list. Well, we now know that was being deliberately manipulated, and certain things that were considered off limits were not allowed to appear there, even if they were actually trending.
Yes.
So the other aspect of the algorithm is that it can be tampered with.
Yes.
It doesn't have to all just be organic.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it's not a conspiracy theory to believe that that's been going on.
It has been going on.
It's a conspiracy fact.
Yeah, even in the techno-surveillance part of what we're looking at is not a theory. There is techno-surveillance.
Yeah.
I mean, you got a technology oligarchs. They're able to work with these governments around the world.
Yeah.
And there's some collusion going on. And you know, as we've mentioned before, the whole COVID narrative that was played out so well throughout the world, so consistently.
Yeah.
Uniformly.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
It's amazing how they did it. I'm very impressed at their ability.
Yeah, the synchronization and coordination. There had to be something else going on. And when we talk about this, and I always have to say this, these are our opinions, and we're doing speculating. We're talking about current events, but we do it. We know that God is in control.
Yeah.
That God looks from heaven and He laughs at the affairs of man who try to thwart His rule and His reign. He's going to rule.
Sure.
He's going to reign. He's not in jeopardy. I believe that God has it all under control from the beginning to the end. Everything in between. I believe all things that are, like they say, what's over my head is under His feet. and that Jesus Christ will return. There's going to be some cataclysmic events that happen prior to the return of Christ. I mean, it's getting there to the return of Christ and everything that's associated. There's a lot of upheaval that's going to happen in this world. But Jesus said, be of good cheer. Do not be troubled. Be of good cheer. I've overcome the world.
Well, here's one of the mysteries of God to me that is fascinating to think about. But for some reason or another, it is God's pattern. God seems to like to pull victory from the jaws of defeat.
Yes.
Not that He has to do it that way.
He doesn't have to do that.
But He chooses to do it that way
Right.
for some reason. It's His character.
Right.
He like, for example, I forget the specifics of the specific Old Testament story, but remember there's a story, it might be Gideon, but there's a battle, and God says, that's too many fighters for me.
It's Gideon. Yeah,
Gideon.
He'll go down to 300.
Yeah, that's too many.
Yeah.
Well, why is that? It's something about God does not want to win. He doesn't want His victory to appear in any way to come from the works of man.
Yeah, it's Him.
It has to all be the supernatural power of God. Because let's say that the tables were turned and the culture war was being won by Christians.
Yeah.
And evil was losing out to good. What would we then turn around and be able to say? Look what we did.
Yeah.
Look how well we served God. Mm-hmm. We did what we needed to do.
Yeah.
But it's not going to work out
Scripture
that way.
says God uses the weak things.
Yes.
He uses, 1 Corinthians 1. God uses the weak things of the world to bring to nothing the things that are mighty.
Yeah, it makes me think of there's a theory, or maybe the theory isn't the right word, but there's a philosophy out there called dominion theology.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that?
Yes, I have.
And basically the idea is that Jesus is going to come back once Christians have taken dominion over the earth and subdued the evil. Mm-hmm. Well, to me, number one, nothing could be further from the truth if you look at the real world today.
Yeah.
But secondly, that doesn't fit with the pattern of how God works.
Yeah.
So,
And we are called to be salt and light.
yeah.
We are called to go and make a difference. And he says, in this world you'll have tribulation. And we will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome. And we are overcomers. We believe Jesus, is the Son of God, that he died on the cross, was resurrected, ascended back up into heaven, and he is coming again. And so we have hope. We don't live this world as hopeless, and but we live knowing that it's going to get bad, because we see what Scripture says.
Yeah.
In the last days, men will grow worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. We're told that the table's going to be set for the Antichrist.
Yeah.
And so we know it's going in that direction, and you see it happening, but you still have to be salt and light.
Yeah.
And there are too many Christians, I do believe, that stick their heads in the sand, and they don't want to, be involved in waging a good fight, fighting the good fight.
Well, that's not how we're called to be.
No,
obviously.
we're to wrestle, we're to fight. This is what Scripture says. I fought the good fight. I've kept the faith. I've run the race. Paul would say at the end of his life. And boy, Paul had some pretty good confrontations in life.
Yeah.
I mean, he had some extremely good confrontations in life, and he kept the faith. And so, if you engage in this culture, and you proclaim the gospel, and you proclaim what the Word of God says, there will be problems. And so some choose to be silent, some choose to be compliant, but man, I'd rather choose to be salt and light.
Yeah, me too.
Salt and light, you introduce light into a dark room, it makes a difference. You put salt on your food, it's going to make a difference.
Yeah.
So you want to be a difference maker. And what an extremely exciting time to be alive.
Yeah, and Christians being salt, I know I've heard some conflicting interpretations of that, but to me, I've always viewed it as a reference to the preservative properties of salt.
Sure.
I know there's another view out there
Right.
That disagrees, but to me, I think it's a reference like if you look at a big piece of meat,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't pack it with salt, it's going to go bad.
Right.
So, the fewer Christians that exist on this planet, the faster this planet is going to start to decompose.
Nothing's worse than rotten meat.
Yeah.
Man, that's a bad smell. Well, we're coming to an end of it. We'll end on the rotten meat. But we know that the Lord is coming back at some point. And like we always like to say, if you've never asked Christ in your life, that's the most important thing you can ever do is repent of your sins and place your faith in Jesus. Remember, somebody pays for your sins. Either Jesus paid for your sins on the cross, or you pay for your sins for all of eternity. And to have somebody else pay for your sins, that's good news. That's why the gospel literally means good news. And if you've never done that, I want to invite you to do that today. Well, thank you so much for being with us. This concludes our latest episode of Uncensored Pilgrims. And until we meet again, I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time on the Uncensored Pilgrims. And we need to let you know that the views that we express on this podcast belong to Marty McLain and Paul Price. They are our views. They do not reflect the views of anyone else. And with that said, we hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time on the podcast.